Hey, it's really good to have you guys, the creators of the Just Stuff podcast, with me on tonight's episode. Isaac, Kyle, and Brandon. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you guys more. Tell me a little bit about the Just Stuff podcast. Are you guys making money on this thing?
Well, Kyle, you're the manager. You would know.
Well, you two are definitely not making any money on it.
I know you guys got some sponsors and stuff. So do people pay you to get a sponsorship ad on the podcast? How's that work?
Yeah, my mom sponsored us a while back. So that was good. If anybody wants to sponsor us, we'll take sponsorship. Basically, we use that money to buy equipment, and we use it to buy t-shirts like this. Bam, boom.
Can I add something in that we're doing with our sponsorship money? Kyle told us we had cash just sitting around from past sponsorships that we hadn't used.
In a cardboard box that Kyle just keeps in a closet.
You don't have to tell them right where it is.
With the way that COVID-19 has been affecting small businesses, we thought it'd be really cool to use some of that money to purchase items from local businesses in town and then do a giveaway on the podcast with that stuff, so that we are using that money to put back into those businesses, but then also, as we're doing it, giving them some publicity. Not that we have a huge reach, but...
Yeah, so go check out our Facebook page. We have currently a giveaway for Muddy Handshakes Pottery. We're giving away a couple mugs, so... Nice. Awesome local business. Go check that out.
So whatever our latest episode post is on our Facebook page, you'll know it because it'll have a number on it. You have to comment on that one. Kyle loves Tim Hortons to get your name entered in.
Oh, nice. So go right now on Facebook, the Just Stuff podcast, and make a comment on their latest episode. Download the episode, listen to it. These guys are you know what it's like? So I was being a bit of a nerd. I like talking about theology and I like thinking about that kind of stuff. I was a little disappointed when I first listened to your podcast because I wanted more of that stuff. I just wanted all of that. But then over time, you guys really grew on me. And I realized that my expectations just had to switch, because it's less like listening to this discussion about heavy topics. And it's more like when you're in your car, it's like 4 of your friends are in the back seat talking about who knows what. It's like having people in your car and you just kind of are there. It's like I listen to it on my way into work now.
Nice.
And I feel like I know you guys, so it's really cool.
We're like mold. We kind of grow on you and we're just there.
Yeah, exactly.
I know from listening to your podcast that you guys recently reviewed Hawk Nelson's album. It was somebody's favorite album or something. Whose was that?
I think that was on my top 5 or something.
Yeah, it was Isaac, one of Isaac's top 5, but
Kyle
he chose the wrong album.
Yeah, Kyle and I like Smile, It's the End of the World, and Isaac likes Letters to the President.
Well, I'm sorry to let you guys all down, but as of this week, Jon Steingard, the lead singer of Hawk Nelson, has publicly came out and said that he no longer believes in God. I grew up in the same era of Christianity as a youth grouper that he did. Seeing him reject it has a little bit of it startles me a little bit, And so I kind of wanted to read through his posts with you guys, and then maybe we could talk through some of his objections and see what you guys make of them. First one, he says, "My prayer in recent days has been, God, if you're there, please show up. I mean it sincerely. So far, I don't feel like I've been answered, but my door remains open." What would you guys say about that? Sort of this idea that, God, if you're there, show me. What do you think of that?
Mr. Theologian, go! Theology powers, activate! Shazam!
I actually want to hear what Kyle has to say first.
Oh, come on! That's terrible! Oh, man. I'll speak to that a little bit because, honestly, I really struggle when I hear stories of people or Christians who say that they've prayed that prayer, like, God, if you're there, please show me. And then a miraculous thing happens in their life and the bright shining light comes into their room and talks to them. And I think that God could very well use those means to speak to some people. I think God definitely doesn't always speak that way. He speaks through a still small voice a lot of the time, I think. And he also speaks through his word. And for me personally, I guess I just feel like if I would pray that prayer, I'd be testing God. And I don't think that it would be a legitimate thing for me.
Like a question like that, I think it's born out of this experiential church movement where it's like like God is something to be experienced more than he is someone to be followed. Now, do you think there's a chance, Isaac, that I'm like minimizing the experiential component of knowing God?
So I listened to your last episode with Len. He talked about a time when he went for a job interview that he didn't want to go to. And turns out the guy that was interviewing him had prayed a prayer the night before, like was on the verge of suicide, and said, God, if you're real, I need you to send me somebody like, and he was actually talking about Len, because Len was a bit of a public figure at the time in his pastoral role. So he knew who Len was. He didn't know him. And then Len shows up for this job interview, and that was God answering that prayer. And that had a major impact for that person. So there are times when something comes of it. Personally, I can't say that I've been at a point in my life where I actually had a gun in my hand and was considering suicide. I don't know what it feels like to get to that point and pray that prayer.
If you've gone past that point, and I say this unfortunately based on experience, you're way past that point. Like you're like that's come and gone a long time ago.
Sorry, Brandon, you said you're way past that point. What were you meaning? Way past what point?
Like God is he's dead. Like he's
in your mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not like the movie God's Not Dead, of which there are like 20. Like God is dead.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just like you're consumed by a darkness sort of thing. And it's not like you're out seeking at that point. You're just like consumed.
No.
Is that sort of
kind of like when Frodo puts on the ring?
Yeah.
And it's just like all darkness. It's almost like the darkness possesses you in a way. You can't think about anything else. Like you can't think about the light side, right? Like you're totally consumed. You're totally thinking about yourself and living in your own hate.
And so that the prayer then for God to show you something is like, in that situation, it is an actual desperate cry for help, as opposed to a show me something magical.
Yeah, I'm really glad you guys brought that up, because I think that's a good balance to what I was saying. I think I was sort of speaking out of frustration, where Christianity becomes sort of like consumerism, and we all sign up for our little God experience. And, I get frustrated at that, because I think it leads to, like, youth groupers going away to a convention to get an experience, and they have some sort of experience, and then they're 26 years old and life is sucking, and then they're like, yeah, that experience was never real, and then their whole, it just goes downhill. But I think it's really good that's a frustration, and it's real, and it's over here, but I think it shouldn't steer the whole Christian ship. The Christian ship has like experiential components to it. I think there should be an expectancy that we expect the Holy Spirit to show up and help us. Like, I don't want to live a life without that sort of expectancy, because that's what breathes life into our relationship.
This just popped into my head. You said kind of like we're on the Christian ship. And when you say ship, you think obviously of the greatest pirate ship series of all time, Pirates of the Caribbean. And if we're on the Christian ship, that means that Jesus is Captain Jack Sparrow. Now, this is theology. This is theology with Brandon. Now, Captain Jack Sparrow, a lot of the time, makes absolutely no sense. The guy can hardly walk, let alone talk. But if you let things play out for about 90 minutes, then you start to realize that Captain Jack Sparrow is absolutely brilliant, and he knows exactly what he's doing. There's a plan.
This is the best. Here's the second objection. If God is all-loving and all-powerful, why is there evil in the world? Can he not do anything about it? Does he choose not to? Is the evil in the world a result of his desire to give us free will? Okay then, but what about famine and disease and floods and all the suffering that isn't caused by humans? If God is loving, why does this stuff happen?
Those are some questions, especially as a teenager. When people would find out that I was a Christian, that was one of the ones that they would ask me, oh, well, why do bad things happen? And honestly, I wrestled with that a lot. And I don't have a perfect answer neatly gift wrapped for you. I guess I can tell you my perspective on it. It really goes back to the Garden of Eden, where man chose a path other than what God's plan was for our lives, rebelled against God. And so obviously, because they rebelled against God and sinned, then death enters the world. Honestly, we read back in the Bible about how they did that, and it's like, oh, well, I would never do that. But honestly, if I put myself in Adam's shoes, I haven't like taken the apple or whatever, but in a different sense, I've done that so many times where I choose a different path other than God's, and I choose to rebel. And so then there's consequences for that sin. And for me, it's really important to remember what a spiritual warfare it is to walk this earth as a Christian, and to know that we have an adversary, Satan, who wants nothing more than to take as much of humanity with him and deny them God's presence. That is his number one goal, I believe. I think you just have the wrong perspective if you're blaming God. I think it's God's mercy that he hasn't just destroyed the world and given people what they deserve, in that we deserve death because of our sin. He is merciful and gracious to us, and he extends his hand to us every day, and he's trying to speak to us and work through the church to the world around us, and give us time to come to him.
That's really good. Nice job, Kyle. Isaac, is that satisfying for you?
No, it won't be satisfying for Isaac.
It's interesting. The question of good and evil, some people may have heard of Greg Boyd. I think he answers that question better than anybody else.
Do you want to roll that out for us?
I could really quickly. The series where he discusses it is like 5 or 6 hours long. So, but essentially,
can you fit it in 3?
I'll do my best.
Okay.
Pull up my notes here. Essentially, love demands free will. So, he could create a microchip and stick it in his wife's ear, and she could only ever do loving things to him and for him. But the entire time he would know that it was entirely fake. She's like a puppet. I'm controlling her. And so what makes her love valuable to him is that she chooses it freely. And so God has to create beings who have free will if they are to enter into a genuine relationship with him. So that's very much in a nutshell. But I think for me to get discouraged by that question and to say, okay, well then God must not exist, it just feels like, really, you're going to let that beat this being who is supposed to be older than time and who has created everything and knows everything? And you're just like all I can think of is God at the end of Job, when he just drips sarcasm all over Job, and he's like, what do you know about anything? Like, you're just a guy. So it's interesting. Like, I've heard that objection before, and I just why I wouldn't believe in a God that could be defeated by that question either, man. What a weak God.
Brandon, what are your thoughts? How does it map onto your favorite movie? I mean, that
That whole time, she's going to kill me for this, but that whole time, all I could think of was, Isaac must have put Jess's chip in the wrong ear.
You're dead.
I know. I was just thinking that we spend a lot of time blaming God for things that we should be blaming Satan for. That about sums up my view on it, to be honest with you. I used to spend a lot of time blaming God for bad things, and I was, wait a minute, those two don't really match. It's like putting two magnets together that are the same polarity. It just doesn't work, right? Then I realized, oh wait, there's a bad dude. Right. So then I started blaming him for those things, and it just seemed to work out. Yeah,
and I think like the whole Christian story really is the answer to this question. Like, kind of Kyle, like as you sort of summed up, God created this beautiful place. We screwed it up, and the Bible is the story of how God's planning on redeeming it all.
Yeah.
And so, like, to get too hung up on it almost is to sort of not catch the drift of what's going on in the grand scheme of things. It really hurts, I think, when bad things happen to you. It becomes very personal. And it's like, it's a theoretical question as we're talking about it in this group. But then, tragedy strikes, and you're like, how could this have happened? I thought God was looking out for my family and for me, and that there was protection, and, or like things like that. I think it can really pull the carpet out from underneath people, but it's really good to talk through these things and realize, as Brandon said, we do have an adversary, as Kyle, you mentioned that too. And why would we be so intent on blaming God? Here's another one. Why does God seem so pissed off in the Old Testament, and then all of a sudden he's a loving father in the New Testament? Why does he say not to kill, but then instruct Israel to turn around and kill men, women, and children to take the promised land? Who wants to take that one?
I would say that's his opinion. And it's an opinion I don't agree with. If you would fact check that, you would see that God isn't pissed off for no reason anyway in the Old Testament. And in the New Testament, I mean, yeah, like he sends his son to die on the cross. Like, just off the top of my head, maybe in the Old Testament, you're seeing God try to work with the people, and in the New Testament, you're seeing God just fully put everything on his son on the cross. It's like it says in Proverbs that the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. And like, I just really believe that to be true. Like, if we fear God for who he is and the power he is, and like, I can't begin to even comprehend the length and the breadth of God. Yeah. On the same hand, I've heard these stories from little up about, the Israelites went in and they slaughtered men, women, and children and just annihilated whole people groups. And it's like, because I was raised in a church, it was just always, oh yeah, that's just normal. Like, that was good. Like, the Israelites were the good guys and everybody else was the bad guys, right? And it's like, as you get older, you read that and you're like, oh my goodness, like that was crazy. I guess I chalk it up to the seriousness of sin. I always get to the point where the penalty for sin is death. I have sinned, and no matter what sin, whether great or small, I deserve to die for it. And so, maybe it's just having the right perspective when you read stories like that.
Isaac, what are your thoughts?
I actually really like the question because I think it's a question that we gloss over a lot. The story of Abraham and Isaac, where Abraham, and I think Jon Steingard referenced this in his post, Abraham takes Isaac up a mountain to kill him because God told him. And something we never talk about is that for any given God of the day at that time to command someone to sacrifice their child would have been like, oh yeah, that's what the gods ask you to do. And so where that story demonstrates God's goodness and character is when God shows up and he's like, no, I actually don't want this. Like, this is not something I desire. And so what I think we see when we read the Old Testament is God not forcing humans to get to the point of like Jesus' perfection immediately, and like trying to work with humans towards like, I love you, I want to meet you where you're at, and let's reconnect. Like, let's have this tabernacle thing where I'll be in your midst, even though I can't be because you're so evil, but I want to be with you. So I'm going to give you all these things to do because let's make this work. I want to be in relationship with you. It's a really good question. I actually think it's better than the good and evil question, but you got to read it like an Israelite.
Yeah, I think you're right. The way I relate to the world, or you guys would, like, say the way we use social media, for instance, the language we use, the jokes we use, all of these things. And then you think about your grandparents and you think about putting yourself and having tea with them. And then you're trying to communicate using all of those things. Like, we intuitively know that people of a different generation, we adapt to them, and we just kind of start communicating the way they're more comfortable. And that's like 2 generations. But, to think about how many generations have gone since the time of the Israelites, culturally, things are so different. And I think it's sort of arrogant for us to read it as moderners and to judge them. We're spoiled. We don't have to deal with a world of war. War, whether you like it or not, was a cultural fact. And the way people related to gods at the time were whether you were victorious in war. And then the God of Israel shows up and he enters into that cultural milieu, but he adapts it. This is theology meets sports, okay? But first, I got to read to you guys this passage from St. Augustine's Confessions. So St. Augustine lived like 350 years after Christ, and he wrote basically what's considered the first autobiography ever written in the West. And this is a little excerpt from that. Basically, what's going on is he's talking about one of his friends. His friend was living in Rome, and a bunch of his friends were wanting to take him to the Colosseum to watch the gladiatorial games. And that's sort of what's happening right now. So he said, when they got in and they had taken their seats that were available, the whole place was boiling with the most savage passions. With his eyelids tightly closed, he forbade his mind to go out to such wicked things. Would that he'd been able to stop up his ears too, for when one man fell in the fight, and an immense roar from the whole audience struck his ears with a violent shock, he was overcome by curiosity. Convinced that whatever it was like, he could defy it and overcome it. Even when he looked at it, he opened his eyes and was wounded more seriously in his soul than the gladiator, whom he lusted to observe. As he looked upon the blood, he drank in the savagery. He did not turn his gaze away, but fixed it and unconsciously imbibed the mad passions. He enjoyed the criminal contest and became drunk with lust for bloodshed. This is Augustine's perspective on the gladiatorial games, and I was wanting to map this on to modern UFC fighting and to have a discussion as to whether we think it's justifiable for a Christian to go and watch these things. I wanted to read that because obviously Augustine's got a pretty strong opinion. Now, before I do want to sort of open it up by saying these are not identical, right? Like, the gladiatorial games often were fights to the death.
The UFC is men in Speedos hugging each other. Just saying it like
we
it is.
definitely shouldn't watch. I was gonna say, on that fact alone, we shouldn't watch it.
And on that bombshell.
Well, first of all, do you guys watch the UFC? No judgment here. I'm not trying to prejudge it. I wanted to talk about it.
I enjoy watching it occasionally.
What is it that you think you enjoy about it? I guess
definitely not the Speedos.
Do you enjoy the violence of it? Is that what gets you interested? You want to see somebody get knocked out?
If there's like a big fight coming up, the reason that I would watch it would be to see a knockout of some sort. Like, I don't want to see something go on for like 7 rounds and then have the judges vote split decision and then it's a draw. It's kind of like watching a soccer game and like, yes, I can't wait for it to be 0-0.
Yeah.
Like, I want something to happen, right?
Do you think like that is a good desire to feed? Like, our desire to watch somebody get destroyed. I guess my question is, maybe I'll run it to Kyle. Kyle, do you think we're feeding something good?
I think there is a point at which, in anything, not just sports, but there's a point at which, I'll use movies, for example. Brandon and Isaac love watching movies, and especially Isaac watches some really like weird ones. And I personally, just because of a lot of things lusts I've struggled with in my life, I choose not to watch movies because I know
all movies. Like, you seriously, you don't watch movies, period.
I mean, if people want to watch a movie, I will sit down potentially, but honestly, I can't remember the last time I watched a movie. I know that if I would watch some of the movies that Isaac or Brandon watched, it would negatively impact my day-to-day walk with Christ because I would be openly exposing myself to something I knowingly struggle with. I know what I'm capable of, and I know what one short scene is capable of doing to my mind and the place that it sends me. And so I choose not to watch those kinds of things because I can't handle it. But for me to make a hard, fast rule that Isaac and Brandon shouldn't watch any movies either, or else they are affected in the same way that I am, I think is a really narrow-minded viewpoint to have. As far as fighting in general, like, I guess I will sit down and watch fighting, and I don't believe that I'm sinning by doing it. Obviously, a knockout is exciting and stuff like that, or a clinch or a hold. What gets me going about... Oh, shut up, Brandon.
You love a good clinch, don't you, Kyle?
What gets me going about fighting is just the inner warrior inside of me. Like, I can really... Oh, shut up, Brandon! I'm serious, man. When I read about David and his mighty men and like they're going in and slaying a bunch of Philistines, like, man, would I ever love to be in that. There's just a part of me that, like, it's the man in me that loves the ruthlessness, I guess. I guess what I'm saying is, like, you have to know what you struggle with and what lusts will overcome you, and so you need to guard against that.
Yeah, that's a good perspective. It's interesting when you said like David's mighty men, and there's like something heroic about that and that we want to celebrate. But what is it that we are trying to celebrate? I don't know that it's the violence, right? The act of heroism is somebody being courageous enough to enter into a situation where they're putting their own life at stake to save somebody. It's like chivalry, it's like heroism, and then there's bravery, and then there's the violence that's attached to it, but it's sort of as like a means to the end of something greater. Whereas like, you know, in the fight, it seems to me like we're celebrating just the act of violence, but disconnected from the true heroic act is. You know, like the warrior in World War II, like maybe lost his life. That's worth celebrating because he died for a cause. But then there's these guys that are getting paid big bucks to let us like sort of like drool over them destroying each other. You know, I'm really like playing devil's advocate because honestly, it sounds like I've made up my mind on this, but I haven't. But my wife, Crystal, she hates it. She absolutely hates all of this stuff. And ever since I've read her she read that Augustine quote at one point, and then it like sealed the deal. She's like, listen, Augustine agrees with me. Everybody is wrong about this ultimate fighting stuff. And so I think I'm trying to portray her arguments the best I can. Like she also would say something like, you know, body is like a divine gift that we are like, you know, what are we going to do with it? We're going to celebrate somebody.
We're going to wear Speedos. Like, what the heck? Why would you put a Speedo over God's gift to humanity?
There was a time when I would have gone all judgmental on people enjoying UFC. There was also a time where I was really into WWE as a kid.
What? Nerd!
First of all, I like, Kyle, what you said about rules. I always think of Romans 14 whenever that stuff kind of comes up, where Paul is like, forget exactly what he says, but if this person thinks it is good to drink wine, then let him drink it to the Lord. And if this person thinks it's not, it's something along those lines. But basically saying like, do you not trust the Holy Spirit to convict you appropriately? Like, and then give grace and trust to your brothers and sisters that it's up to them to obey the Holy Spirit's convictions, not up to us to police them on it. But
what do I know? Some people you should tell that to.
Oh man, I will get angry sometimes. Not all the time. I'll watch a UFC fight with friends if that's what they're watching, but sometimes I'll get angry watching it because like what I hate, and this happens in hockey fights too, and I love hockey, but when somebody gets really hurt, you know, there's like knockouts where like a guy clearly lost, but then there's like somebody's really hurt, and then people start celebrating or like get all excited, and I'm like, man, that really sucks, man. That guy just mangled another person and he got paid to do it, and you're loving it. Like,
yeah, that's a real line. Like, I mean, I think with the gladiatorial games, and I think it's important to maybe observe that because the ME or Ultimate Fighting Challenge, like the goal is not like when people have died in the because of those as a result of the matches, but that's not the goal, and they're deemed tragic when it happens. Yeah. Whereas like in the gladiatorial games, it's like,
oh, it was the goal. Yeah.
The goal was sort of that, and the crowd would cheer as to whether they thought the loser should lose his life or whether he should be spared. And so, I mean, there's a different, like, I don't know, there's really a line that seems to get crossed there. And I think you're touching on it. When the player gets injured or the fighter gets injured, like, we're not supposed to revel in that. Well, guys, thank you so much for being my third guest on Conversations.
Wait, really there's cool. A second one? Did I miss the second one?
I don't know what one you watched. What did you watch?
I watched the one, I'm so sorry, I forget her name. Her first name was Emily, the musician one.
Oh, you watched that one?
I watched that one.
That was our first one, and then I interviewed our pastor for the second one.
Dennis, since I produced the podcast, I was wondering if maybe in the next couple episodes you'd be interested in coming on with us.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be great.
Cool. Nifty.